Devices, devices, devices everywhere. Theorist Marshall McLuhan once declared, the medium is the message, basically saying the format is as important as the message. Either buttressed by science or flying in the face of it, we cherish our records, our Polaroids, our tapes, the specificity of them against the sludge of grey goo that is the flattened world of the iPad. It's precisely why we like to play our retro games on the original hardware. See, the quirks are the point. A simple screen and generic Xbox USB controller cannot replicate the experience of this or this or this. Historical context and information emanates from the paratext too, the boxes, the art, the manuals. Every detail brings us closer to what exactly? To memory? Out of our bodies to something tactile and beyond our increasingly alienated and disintermediated digital existence. Wait, but I cherish my iPad as I would my child, or at least one that can be backed up on the cloud and restored at any time. See, as long as we've had the noble dedicated device, with all its idiosyncrasies and beautiful limitations, we've also gazed into the horizon, holding fast to the promise of the all-in-one. Tom Hanks loves typewriters, sure. In fact, he collects them, but he's also no hater of technology. That's why he put out Hanks Writer on the iPad. Mobile gaming has long been second class, but with mobile games being ported to Steam and Switch to great success, and current gen games like Assassin's Creed and Resident Evil 4 hitting iPad, once closely defended distinctions in gaming are also being upended. This same convergence and narrowing of the technological gap has opened a lane for the Lenovo Legion Go, the ROG Ally, and the Steam Deck to challenge Nintendo's dominance in the handheld gaming space for the first time in decades. The threat of mobile may have forced Nintendo to open up its IP to the App Store for casual gaming, but the current situation is a new class of threat altogether. All this not coincidentally as Sony re-enters the handheld space with its PlayStation Portal, a remote player, a remote concept compared to handhelds of the past and a true sign of the times. So taking all these disparate ideas together, we are necessarily led back to one thing, this, the PSP. The PlayStation Portal and PS Vita, the would-be new age Walkmans. These devices demonstrate firstly the compelling nature of the all-in-one handheld, gaming and multimedia device, before smartphones ever graced our lives. Second, the PSP was powerful enough to signal the coming technological convergence of living room entertainment on the go. Third, the PSP sits between a universal screen like an iPad, where the device melts away, and imposing itself as an object to be engaged with, part of the package. The PSP and Vita have their own vibes, and are capable and beloved to this day because of their unique features. At the same time, the PSP is closer to a universal screen with its movie and music playback, many emulators and internet browsing than more gaming-focused Nintendo DS, which while also having some similar functions, de-emphasize them. So we have the tension of the universal all-in-one versus dedicated device, with the PSP at the fulcrum of both. Lastly, PSP and Vita was the last time Nintendo had a true apples-to-apples rival in the handheld gaming sector. So it's instructive to take stock with the PSP Portal's arrival, why Sony chose the route it did, and why the legacy of the PSP and Vita matters. So I'm going to wave my hand. You out there go like and subscribe, or better yet, leave a comment, so we can get stuck into it. This year's PlayStation Portal and 2005's PlayStation Portable may have the initials PSP in common, but their approaches to handheld stake out diametrically opposing camps. To the ire of many, it seems, the PlayStation Portal is an unapologetic single-purpose device. It makes no bones about its tunnel-like focus on streaming games from your PS5. The original PSP did movies, music, ebooks, web browsing, early sat-nav, and had cellular in the case of some Vita models. Portal's pitch is playing your PS5 library on a crisp-looking, decently large portable screen with acceptable lag and minimal visual artifacts on a decent Wi-Fi connection, and playing those games well with a premium DualSense level controller. There are few affordances. There's no Bluetooth, there's no web browser, no cellular connection. The only content you can stream is your game library from the PS5. Video streaming services and other multimedia functions are not supported. That this is all locked down is no oversight. It would have been trivial to implement such features. So Sony has gone out of its way to limit the purpose of the Portal. In this way, its value is limited to how good it is to hold and play. What I said at the beginning about the hardware itself having an identity, but this is a dangerous bet. When, as many have pointed out, a Backbone 1 essentially turns your tablet or phone into a PlayStation Portal with cellular connection, web browser required to connect to many Wi-Fi hotspots, and Bluetooth. In the world of the universal screen, Sony have taken an app, PS5 Remote Play, available on almost any platform, and reified it into a hardware device. This, when almost any hardware device could act as a PlayStation Portal. Yeah. Little wonder it's been divisive. I'd say initial skepticism has blossomed into qualified success. So, points to Sony. But why did they even choose to re-enter the handheld space after declaring they were hanging up their hats in 2019, with a disappointing 16 million unit run with the Vita? And why did early rumors of a Vita 2-like successor prove so off the mark? Of course, all roads lead back to the first PSP, the PlayStation Portable. A winner at 18 million units, but not one without hard lessons for Sony. The original PSP wasn't technically the first Sony Portable. That honor rests with 1999's Pocket Station, which is to PDAs as the PSP is to smartphones. If you've lost right now, the Pocket Station was a PlayStation memory card with some buttons and an LCD screen, sound and other capabilities. It connected with a bunch of PS1 games to display extra information and allowed for various mini games. This was also peak Tamagotchi era, so yeah, although it didn't leave Japan, it was a multi-million seller in its native land with over 100 games incorporating some form of Pocket Station functionality. Evidently, this planted the ambition in Sony for bigger and better things, as within a few short years, the PSP would be announced and released to the world. The PSP and Vita in 2023 are very different beasts to what they were in 2005 and 2012 respectively. Most notably, homebrew emulators and game ISOs can be launched with little fuss from even the latest firmware, either 6.61 for PSP or 3.73 for Vita. Simply drop the latest firmware version in an update folder on the memory card and off you go. No need to use anti-consumer proprietary memory stick duo format either, because you can get an easy micro SD adapter with just a click. After replacing the battery and perhaps upgrading the screen, all you have to do is head on over to psppunk.com or vita.hacks.guide, and which will walk you through the process like a breeze, and you'll be off and running. With multi-emulators like RetroArch, the PSP is more than capable of handling whatever 8-bit and 16-bit era games you throw at it, not to mention native PS1 emulation. The Vita is even more impressive, even today, and with Adrenaline, your PSP library becomes backwards compatible on Vita. But this near frictionless 2023 reality elides the long war between Sony and hackers of its handheld systems, the battles fought and lessons learned, which goes a long way to explaining Sony's hardcore stance with the PS Portal and why they balked at a PS Vita 2 even as the Switch and Steam Deck fly high. Some history. As early as 1998, Sony were cooking up plans for a handheld, codenamed ET Project, according to reporting by GamesIndustry.biz. As a fun aside, I even found some scattered Chinese sources referring to a gaming Walkman called Game Man, apparently conceived of as far back as the original Game Boy, but it reeks of unsubstantiated internet rumor. The ET Project, however, was very real, seemingly making it to the prototype stage. In the end, Sony would hold off a few more years before announcing the PSP around E3 2003. Understanding the PSP comes down to understanding piracy on the PSP. Sony famously sells hardware at a loss. to make up profits with software sales. But the attachment ratio, or software sales per PSP sold, was very low, partially as a segment of users had purchased the PSP as a multimedia device and not for gaming, just as with the PS2 and its DVD player, and partially due to rampant piracy, including in China. PSP imports were something of a grey area in the mainland at the time, as it wasn't until 2014 that the countrywide console ban would be lifted. Though in practice this ban allowed for exceptions like the IQ player, PS2 as an entertainment device, and Xiaobao Wang's Shuixiji or study machines. In any case, unlike those examples, the PSP wasn't ever officially launched in the mainland and instead made its way to the mainland through places like Hong Kong and Shenzhen. This is relevant as some figures suggest that at one point, 1 in every 2 PSPs was making its way to China. Demand was enough that prices were as high as 6,000 yuan before leveling off at 2,000. A conservative estimate puts PSP sales in China at 5 to 10 million units. Though due to the whole unauthorized nature of the enterprise, we won't ever really know. It is significant that up to 10 to 15% of PSPs ended up in China, as few players were buying official UMD discs due to factors such as price and lack of Chinese language titles. Since the imports were already unauthorized, software piracy was the norm, and zooming out across the world, Sony would be locked in a non-stop cat and mouse game with hackers deploying constant mandatory firmware updates and software revisions in a bid to get ahead of piracy. Modern Vintage Gamer does a phenomenal play-by-play of this for both the original PSP and Vita, detailing both the timeline of developments and the technical aspects of how successive security measures were defeated. Anybody around for this era will remember the legendary crackers in the scene like Dark Alex, and exploits such as Pandora's Battery. Rockstar even recalled copies of Liberty City Stories in order to patch a vulnerability. China also played a role here as well, as on the A9VG forums arose a user called Liquid Zugong, who managed to pioneer a method to crack huge titles like Kingdom Hearts, Birth by Sleep, and God of War. His policy was to wait a week after a game's release to make his cracks available, but ended in controversy with one of the PSP's biggest titles. Monster Hunter, the ISO for the game, was leaked early and duly cracked by Liquid Zugong within hours. However, he was firm on his policy of not making the crack public until after the official release. However, he did circulate cracked versions to fan translation or Hanhua groups early so that gamers would be able to play in their native language. In fact, over 500 PSP games, or roughly a third of the library, would be ultimately translated by such groups, which is an impressive feat. Way to go, folks. Anyway, Monster Hunter leaked from one of these groups, causing massive infighting and attacks and doxing of Liquid Zugong, ultimately causing him to exit the scene altogether. But he would be fondly remembered in the community as 中国头届游戏第一人 的 L Shen, or China's #1 game cracker, L God. In terms of being a multimedia powerhouse and blurring the lines with a phone, the PSP from model 2000 would support Skype, and an add-on camera was also released. Cellular and rear and front cameras came with the Vita. The digital-only PSP Go revision closely resembled a slider phone, sporting a slide-out controller instead of a keypad. The Xperia Play was an actual full-blown Android smartphone based around the same form factor. It's based on the PlayStation Mobile framework with exclusive support for a number of PlayStation titles for the first time on mobile. An Xperia Play 2 was prototyped but never made it to market. Additionally, there would be a budget E1000 PSP without Wi-Fi. The forgotten PlayStation TV from 2014 was just a Vita streaming/gaming box for your big screen. With all this experimentation, we see Sony playing with the idea of mobile versus a gaming device. Do we have an all-in-one device versus a dedicated gaming hardware? And with what is the difference between a handheld and a TV console? Sony was ahead of the curve with the trends, pushing how fluid these boundaries could be. And as we noted in our Nintendo DS episode, in most of the world, the DS outsold the PSP 2-1. But in China alone, PSP ruled the roost. There was a sense in China that they'd been overlooked. So raw power held more appeal to a country long denied it. Most gamers had no means to access a current gen console experience. PSP promised not only this, but also native support for web browsing, movies, music, ebooks, and more, with GPS add-ons making it incredibly useful. It was, and as is, a fantastic system for emulation. For budget-conscious consumers, the PSP offered many of the features of a laptop or phone, but also top quality gaming. Basically, the PSP was a fantastic proposition. However, by the Vita, smartphones had become ubiquitous and a lot of the value add was lost. After piddling sales, it was discontinued. Though the Vita store, but not the PSP one, is still active as of this video. So what does all this say about where we are today with the PS Portal, the legacy of the PSP, and Sony's forays into the handheld arena? We can see Sony grappling with shifting technologies in a lot of interesting ways, and presaging the rise of the universal hand screen like the iPad for high-end gaming. Die-hard Vita and PSP fans attest to the importance of a unique character to a device, while also making the argument in favor of having a full suite of entertainment features. So it sits in this weird space. The Switch and Sony's home consoles have been more successful at curbing piracy, so it's not as if this is an unsolvable issue. But given how deeply Sony was burned and how much investment they sink into their high-end hardware approach, it makes sense they'd be wary of directly competing with Nintendo, who puts out much lower spec hardware. The Steam Deck and others only crowd the field. So Sony simplified and gave us the most distilled product it could, taking note of the lessons from the PSP and trends in the industry. Is it a case of once bitten, twice shy? Let me know in the comments. But for now, I'm Jesse, and this has been Happy Gaming House.